Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Drawing on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top performers, athletes, and teens from professional sports to top universities to the U.S. military, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry discuss topics and strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best. Join us and our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry as we investigate and challenge the most popular training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols. And away we go. Here we are with the Principles of Performance podcast. I'm your host, Eric DeGatti, and I am flying solo today. My friend and co-host, Mike Perry, had a scheduling conflict today, and I did not want to let this get in the way of getting the guy that we're going to have on the show as our guest today, because I've been chasing after him for quite a while. Pratik Patel is a former assistant strength and conditioning coach and director of performance nutrition nutrition in the NFL, who now serves as a one-on-one personal coach as well as an advisor and consultant to startups and VCs in the health and wellness industry. And I got turned on to his work from a lot of the great stuff he posts on social media. And so we're going to have all his links up because there's a wealth of information that he puts out every day. And it's not the typical BS nutrition stuff. That this is real life practical stuff that he's really good at doing. And I can't wait to dive into the conversation. So thank you very much for joining us today, Pratik.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
All right, so let's start off by discussing how you kind of blend, your background in strength and conditioning as well as with your nutrition and your coaching.
Yeah, so first and foremost, through schooling, I was first credentialed as a dietitian, so bachelor's in dietetics, and then went back to get a master's in kinesiology because in and around that time that I had finished up school and did my clinical internship, I was trying to find jobs in the health and wellness and sports space. And some people that had been in for a good amount of time mentioned, like, well, you can make yourself a little bit more marketable if you not only know about nutrition, but you can pair it together with exercise recommendations, regardless of the population that you're working with. So before my career snowballed in sports, my end goal, I thought the coolest thing in the world would be, oh, I'm going to be a personal trainer and then give meal plans to people at a gym. Because I love the gym. I've been obsessed with it since I was in high school. But then starting to learn a lot more, taking the advice of people that had been in working with sports and performance training centers, they said, look, if you can't get your foot in the door, specifically with nutrition, because 10, 15 years ago, these roles weren't as prevalent. They were very touch and go here and there. You might have a consultant, you might have a strength coach doing this stuff. They said you can make yourself a little bit more marketable if you might have that strength and conditioning background. So if you are a strength coach and you are a dietitian, that makes you very valuable, because a lot of people aren't going to take the time to go through schooling to do 7, 8 years to do both, because it's a lot of time and it's a lot of money. So I ended up doing that, and going through the curriculum, it started to just make a ton of sense. I think most people who are very interested in health and fitness and taking care of their bodies and building their bodies up know that unless you're just a genetic freak and outlier, like if you pay attention to nutrition and recovery, you can really support those training adaptations and get to your goals quicker and maintain your goals and health status if you know about everything. So being able to blend both of those together, learning, studying it, and then applying it to the different populations I was working with as I was progressing through my career, just really allowed me to see a full picture and hopefully make better decisions, relate to those people more, support all the other people that I was working with when you're either dealing with clients or athlete care, and just be that much more valuable in the roles that I had.
Right. So I'm love that you put up the lens that you have of seeing kind of from both sides, from the fitness and the performance side. And also what you brought up about that there are freaks out there. And that's one of the things when I dabble a little bit in just, around the edges of nutrition with my clients and explain to them, say, look, there are people that are freaks. And we were just talking before we hit record that my time with the Giants and your time just missed each other by about 6 months. But I explained to him, like, I work with these people that they're freaks. Like there was one guy who was a player who was a big name. All right. Super Bowl champ, 2-time Super Bowl champion, big name, had like veins in his abs and calves. And when I would go to his house to work with him, he had two food groups. It was barbecue potato chips and tequila. And it's like, there are other people that get away with that. But I explained to him, like, if you were that person, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Like for the normal people, talk about like how you approach a nutrition plan for an athlete versus a non-athlete, and what are kind of the main variables that affect those decisions.
Yeah, I think the fundamental principles are always going to be the same. The athletes are normal humans. They're just very good at a specific sport, and they've, been able to make a very lucrative career out of it, especially if they're a veteran or a pro that has been in the game for a good amount of time. But ultimately, the thing that separates an athlete from, someone like myself, a normal Gen Pop person, is they have a significant amount of physical stress that they are constantly imposed upon. So they have to do very unique things. The sport that they play imposes very unique demands on them, more so than a normal person. So understanding what somebody's health status is, understanding what their general habits and lifestyle are, and then trying to figure out what is the main thing to work on, because some things athletes do are pretty good. You know, some things, some athletes, there's like 50,000 things to fix, but it's like, okay, what's the highest priority thing, the lowest hanging fruit that's going to provide the highest ROI? So what I like to do is start with a pretty significant in-depth assessment, because as I told you before, once you start learning all these different aspects of health and performance, and you know that how all of them are intercorrelated, something that an athlete might not know about could be really holding them back. And unless you dive deeper and ask those questions within the assessment, or try to get more in-depth analysis from them, whether it's blood work, whether it's hair, urine, saliva, um, blood, genetic testing, frame size profiling, that stuff then really starts resonating and showing like, okay, I know what is going on, what this athlete really needs to work on, and what this client needs to work on. And from there, you can start piecing together what are the recommendations based on what they need to do to actually get healthy and then help support their goals. But ultimately, the main thing is it has to be realistic to fit within their schedule. That's why you can't take these generic workouts, these generic meal plans, and tell somebody like, hey, can you follow it, when, you might have an athlete that's eating 2 times a day and they need to get 4,000 calories to support, their workload in the off season because they're trying to gain muscle mass. Like, hey, I want to gain 15 pounds, 10 pounds over the course of 3 to 4 months. I'm like, okay. But if someone's going from just eating 2 times a day and they have to supposedly eat, 5 to 6 times a day, it's not going to happen overnight. So a lot of it has to always be meeting them where they're at and trying to figure out what's the easiest thing to focus on. Let's chase 1 or 2 rabbits. Let's not chase 5 rabbits, because if we try to fix 5 different things all at once, it might be overload for them. It's one thing that they haven't even put on the top list of their priorities. That's why they're struggling in these areas. So let's just make it very easy for them. Like, hey, I need you to fulfill these 1 or 2 things, and let's monitor and evaluate it over the course of 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Let's see how this first block goes, see how this first month goes. And then I can start pushing you a little bit further once it starts becoming more of a habit. So it just starts with a very thorough assessment, a lot of subjective questions, and then trying to get objective data, because that's really what's going to clue in, like, okay, from a superficial standpoint, an external standpoint, I know what's going on, but now I know what's going on internally. Because the truth of the matter is, when we was with the Giants, we were doing very in-depth blood work analysis. It's one of the big things that I was in charge of with Quest Diagnostics as a great partner. And a lot of athletes that as are freaks, they can handle the demands of the sport. I can run fast, I'm very strong, I'm explosive, I can get through a practice, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy. And as you know, it's just one of those things that something's going to happen if there are a lot of things that are going wrong behind the scenes. So getting more objective data on them and then crafting that solution, regardless if it's an athlete or it's a non-athlete.
Okay, so I want to come back to some of that lab testing in a minute, but talking about some of the big rocks and the main tenets, if you follow your work, it's not too far down the feed where you find out how big you are on protein consumption, right? So talk a little bit about why and some of the strategies you suggest to make sure someone's getting an adequate amount of protein to reach their goals.
Yeah, and this is more so not necessarily for the athlete. I think athletes, if they are doing at least a decent job of eating, it's a lot easier for them to meet their protein thresholds because they have lower recommendations in terms of just gram per kilogram recommendations, as opposed to if you're a normal American or a normal human, you're likely either overweight or obese. You have glucose control issues, you might have some insulin resistance. So that's where protein as a macronutrient becomes very important, because generally most of the people that I've assessed, and I've assessed thousands over the course of the past decade plus, um, including some athletes, but the majority of the non-athletes really struggle with getting the protein recommendations based on where their health status is. So that's why I'm a huge advocate for it. Not to say that's the only thing they need to eat, but because it's the one thing that's really lacking and they're not making a priority or a focus of how they structure their day, how they're eating. We know that in a variety of different populations, when you start increasing your protein intake from good quality sources, whether it's animal sources, plant sources, from whey or dairy, and you make that a focal point, it does have a positive effect with curbing hunger, controlling calories consumed later on in the day, at least hoping to maintain muscle mass. It is the macronutrient that has the highest thermic effect of food. It provides more fullness. It does help with blood glucose control later on in the day. So there's a variety of different reasons why just at least meeting your protein goals is going to be really important. That can help snowball with other decisions and other health parameters moving on. So the range I like to recommend for most people, depending on what your goals are. So if you're an avid exerciser, you don't have any issues with what your body comp looks like, at least 1.5 to 1.6 grams per kilogram is enough to help maintain and at least gain muscle mass, provided that you're eating enough carbohydrates, because when you consume carbohydrates, it actually becomes amino acid sparing, as opposed to somebody that's on a lower carbohydrate diet. Um, you eat more protein because a lot of that's going to get converted in the livers through gluconeogenesis because you need glucose as well. So the range is anywhere between 1.6 to about 2.2. If you're somebody that is in a severe caloric deficit or you're really restricting carbohydrates for a variety of different reasons, then you can go as high as 2.5. And then a lot of great research that's come out from the ISSN says you can go even as high as 3.3 or 4.4, which is a lot. Generally I've never recommended that to anybody unless they wanted to do an experiment on themselves, a little bit of citizen science or self-science. But that's why I'm always going to be a huge advocate. And the population that my background is Hindu Indian, and a lot of my people are unfortunately predisposed to cardiovascular disease, blood glucose issues, and this is pretty rampant in my family. And the data also shows that protein intake in these populations is very low compared to what they would want to eat to not only get healthy, but also prevent some of these chronic diseases from happening. So that's why I'm very open and try to share that information and debunk a lot of the myths that are out there about protein intake. Like, it doesn't damage your liver, it does not damage your kidneys, it does not exacerbate bone loss. Quite the opposite from what a lot of these studies have shown.
Yeah, there was actually just a BS article that came out in one of the big publications just a couple weeks ago, right? Warning about how people are eating too much protein, and nothing could probably be further from the truth.
Yeah, when you actually look at the article, what they did was they looked at mechanistic relationships of leucine in and of itself, and they actually weren't calling leucine an amino acid. They were calling it something else, which didn't make any sense to me because it's a branched chain amino acid. It's one of the essential amino acids. But then they were also looking at the intake. It was coming from a very common nutritional drink. There was like a booster Ensure. So then you actually look at the ingredient list on that. It's 20% calories, protein, but it also has poor quality carbohydrates. They added a very cheap source of fat, probably like a processed oil. And then they're just making these inferences about protein intake and how it can increase atherogenicity when it was more mechanistic in nature. So when you actually and there were a lot of really good research that broke down the study and was like, all of this does not make any sense. They're just taking something that's a hypothesis and then drawing massive conclusions. And it might not have been the intention of the researchers. It's when the media gets a hold of it. That's the issue. So the media gets a hold of it, and then they make their own inferences and generalizations about what they think the study is saying, even though that might not necessarily be exactly what the researcher's saying. And then they say, oh, protein intake when you get past this specific threshold. And they used a percentage, which doesn't make any sense. So if they say, oh, if you get past 20%, well, 20% of somebody eating a 1,200 calorie diet versus a 2,000 calorie diet versus a 3,000 calorie diet doesn't make any sense, because if you just leave it at a percent threshold, you can scale up or down, and it changes the gram amount that you end up eating, which completely negates their hypothesis. So again, it's just understanding. There's a lot of nuance with studies. There's a lot of nuance with applying these recommendations, and understanding everybody's individual situation allows you to create the better recommendations of what they should be doing.
Okay, now, as while we're sticking on protein, you also suggest that everyone who does consume higher protein should do two things daily. What are those two things and why?
Yeah, if you eat a good amount of meat, or you consume a lot of whey protein, methionine is it's one of the essential amino acids very prevalent in animal proteins and meat, and a high amount of methionine requires a higher amount of B vitamins, folate, B12, but also it's rate limiting for glycine, which is a non-essential amino acid, but it's very important for a variety of different reactions in the body. So what they've shown is when you have higher methionine intakes, it correlates to increasing levels of homocysteine in the absence of folate, B12, and glycine. Now, homocysteine has been shown to be have a strong correlation with increasing cardiovascular risk factors over time. So to keep those at bay, and I'm always going to be a big advocate of people doing their due diligence, especially as you get older, like just do advanced blood work once per year. It doesn't have to be quarterly, it doesn't have to be biannually, but understand where you're at. And I think the medical community can and should do a better job, because people are always going to default to doctors, and doctors are going to do these general blood panels like a complete metabolic profile and a CAM10 or CBC, but it doesn't allow you to actually dive deeper into what your overall health status is. So again, the things that we were doing with Giants, things I do with my clients, to actually understand, like, okay, your doctor said you were healthy, but when I actually look at more advanced panels, we have a variety of different things that are kind of telling us otherwise. Now, nobody has to be worried about that, because you can always change that absence of taking any medication. So if you do eat a significant amount of protein, and I think a lot of the people that I interact with, whether it's in the sport world, coaching world, a lot of my followers are in line with that. It's understand what your health status is, what your labs are, because you don't want to leave some of these things unchecked and then compounding a lot of other health issues with high homocysteine. Oh, I've got insulin resistance. I have high stress levels, and then something's starting to happen over time.
Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into some of the testing. So, you've already kind of discussed what you do with the high level athletes. Let's say I'm just someone who's looking to get in shape. I want to get as healthy as possible. I want to improve my chances at longevity and vitality. Where do I even start beyond what my doctor gives me?
Yeah, the good thing about this day and age is there are a lot of companies that definitely do support people just being empowered to learn about their own health. So you've got, Quest Diagnostics, you've got Ulta Labs, you've got LabCorp, you have um, Mark Hyman's new company, Function. And again, you are going to have to pay out of pocket, because the unfortunate thing is insurance doesn't cover some of these things. Especially if you end up going to your doctor and you ask, like, hey, can I get advanced panels? And the doctor's like, well, it's going to cost a lot more, because when you start adding on a lot more biomarkers, it increases the cost of what the blood draw is going to end up being. So the good thing about it is you can go to some of these companies, independent of having to go to your doctor. You kind of pick which panel you're interested in. You buy it, it gets signed off by a doctor, you get a requisition form, and then you go to a local like Quest Diagnostics and you schedule your test. The appointment's free. You take your paper in, they do all the analyses, send you on your way, and then once it gets to the lab, it gets analyzed and the results come back, you get, email access to it, and you can actually see, okay, these are the results for all the different tests that I just ended up doing. Um, Ultimately, and then other companies, Wellness FX, Inside Tracker, they're making it more accessible, which is great. Ultimately, you do want to understand what the results mean, and knowing your situation, your daily schedule, your health status, your environment, your lifestyle choices can add some context to why these results are the way they are. So you don't necessarily want to just take them at face value. So there are reasons why the labs will end up showing they are, and then understanding everything around it can help you recognize, like, okay, this is the reason why this is elevated, this is the reason why this is lower, and now this is what I can do about it. If it's something that is not within normal limits or should be increased or should be decreased, I think that's empowering to know what that is, instead of, a lot of people just go along their merry way and have no clue. um, Two recent clients of mine, one is a professional client. He sent me his lab work and everything seemed to be pretty good. His A1C can be improved, but his testosterone was legitimately at like 200. And he had no clue. He's like, well, I've been working out 5 days a week. My end goal is to kind of reduce some of my belly fat, my visceral fat. That's kind of like the biggest issue that I'm having. I do have a very high stress job. And without that information, we wouldn't have known that was there. So I'm like, okay, this is what we can do to address it with some lifestyle choices, with some nutrition and supplementation. Another one is like, this is very common. I've got an off-season NFL athlete, did advanced labs. some stuff looked all right. The biggest thing that shown to me was his vitamin D level was 9. Um, African American, lives down south, tries to spend a good amount of time outdoors, but still isn't able to synthesize as much vitamin D to help get those levels at least to sufficient. So without actually doing any of the testing, and if I were just to be like, hey, here's your workout and meal plan, we wouldn't be able to address some of these things that pop up. Now, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It doesn't mean something bad's going to happen, but we do have a lot of correlations from past data, from different data that's been collected by teams and doctors to show that there are strong correlations between low vitamin D and the increase in musculoskeletal injury, decreased immune function, decreased ability for recovery, poor sleep, a variety of different things. So it's like, okay, now we have more information, and I'm armed with more information to create a better plan and protocol to help support what this athlete should be doing in the off season.
Okay, so let's keep going with testing and solutions because one of the things that kind of puts my guard up when I see some of these, especially the commercially based ones, are their solutions are a lot of this for that type of thing. Meaning, all right, you're low in this, so take this supplement, and a lot of it is driven by they're ultimately trying to sell you in the testing because they want to get you on their brand of supplements and so forth. So it's not as simple as saying, well, you're low in this, so take this supplement. You're low in this, take this supplement. Like, talk a little bit about how we discern where we're getting just kind of to a commercial trapping versus something that's going to give us good baseline data that has more habit forming and actionable things other than just take a pill for it.
Yeah, I think that's the conundrum that a lot of Americans and just people in general are finding because a lot of these companies aren't going to make their money off of the testing. Testing's expensive. That's unfortunately the reality. If you want to get a good panel, you're going to shell out a few $100. I think it's worth it because if you can address something head on earlier versus waiting a decade or two to then end up having some kind of chronic issue where you are now reliant on medication, you are shelling out a good amount of money per month and you're shelling out a good amount of money for copays for doctor visits. But most people aren't thinking in a preventative sense, and that's just what one of the biggest issues, as a coach trying to help a lot of people, but really I can only help people that want to be helped. So I think finding either a company or a situation where, hey, I'm working with somebody who is telling me to get this panel, and then I take the results to them, and then we walk through it. And I have a better sense of it, whether it's your doctor or whether it's, a specific coach or somebody that is knowledgeable about being able to read labs. And instead of just throwing supplements, I don't like throwing a ton of different supplements because honestly, most people um, I think they put way too much stock in it. I think there is a case where if you have some serious issues going on, there's massive inflammation, there's a lot of things going on internally. You might have, some toxicity, heavy metals, overload, whatever. Then okay, there is a need for specific things. But ultimately, if lifestyle changes and nutritional changes can provide the assistance of improving those labs, and somebody feels like, hey, that's a low barrier of entry, I can do that, then why not start with that? But if there is a need for some supplementation because it's just not going to happen through those lifestyle changes, it's not going to happen through their nutrition because, this is the way they've always eaten and it's already going to be pulling teeth to try to get them to eat a little bit healthier, then the addition of supplementation can help. So um, it is kind of buyer beware with some of these companies that you end up working on because they're not going to make their money on testing. They're going to make a lot more money on the supplementation because it doesn't cost a lot for them to manufacture it because the margins are very high. So they want to get you into that subscription model.
And then speaking of kind of vetting for quality, talk about the supplements. Like there's a million supplements, and because of the way the laws are set up, there's very little oversight into nutritional supplements. You and I could go make, our own creatine in the washroom and sell it as long as we don't make any outrageous claims. And even that, there's loopholes around, right? So how do we distinguish a high quality supplement versus the other? Because they all try to sell you the same crap. Oh, we use this at the Olympic Training Center. We work with professional athletes, and a lot of it's bullshit. So how do we discern what's an actual safe and reputable supplement versus a one that's not?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because there's a new supplement company coming out every, 10 minutes, unfortunately, because again, it's cheap to make when you chuck up the margins and people can make a good amount of money selling like a greens juice or a powder or the plain creatine. But ultimately, looking at the reputation of a brand, what testing and certifications do they go through? Is it USP? Is it NSF? Is it NSF certified for sport? Is it higher level ones where they have external groups come in and do specific audits and testing of their manufacturing and research practices, which I think is very, very important. And companies that abide by that, obviously, they're going to have to spend a lot of money to get that done. But over time, that's where you want to feel comfortable and confident. So when I recommend supplements, I like companies like Thorne's, probably one of the best in the world. They go through some of the most stringent testing procedures, and there's a variety of other ones from the sports supplement space. If you're an athlete, you have a variety like Clean Athlete, Momentous, Designs for Health, Design for Sport. And then from a general perspective, you have Pure Encapsulations, um, Thorne as well. I mean, there are a handful, but those are the ones that I tend to trust the most. Not only have I used them with clients and athletes, use them on myself, I use them with my family members. So, I'm more than confident about that. Just being able to make sure that the company is reputable, and then you have to discern what it is that somebody should be taking, what the recommendation should be. And that brings a whole nother ballgame, because then you want to use somebody's health status. What are they deficient in? What's going to provide a benefit? What can you get from food? What you get from food? And then push them in the right direction. When nowadays everybody's just talking about, I'm a big fan of creatine. I think 99.9% of people are going to get a benefit from it. It's not going to help everybody, because I don't think there's a single thing that every single person should be taking. But I think for the most people on the planet, there are huge benefits and uses of it. Everybody's talking about the stress gummies, the ashwagandhas, and a variety of different things that start popping up, collagen, colostrum. So there are use cases, but not everybody should be taking everything, especially all at once.
Okay, so the one that stood out is kind of like the staple that if there's one thing that's very hard to get from food that people should look into exogenously is creatine. And it's so like the more they research it, the more good stuff they find about it, and the less fear we should have over taking it. And it's almost to the point where like everybody from like post adolescence to senior citizens should be taking this stuff. But the obviously when people are trying to distinguish what makes our product versus better than the next product, they're going to put all kinds of bells and whistles. But it seems the most effective is just plain old creatine monohydrate. But the question is how much? Everybody has this general 5 grams, but if I have a 110-pound distance runner versus a 300-pound lineman, that probably doesn't jive, correct?
Yeah, so the 5 gram is kind of like if you're unsure of what to take and you're a standard adult, that can kind of check the boxes of what you could potentially take. You can even break it down so you have a gram per kilogram recommendation, which is 0.03. So that would actually cut down if you have a smaller individual or a smaller athlete. I think the unique thing about certain instances when you're talking about bone health and sleep deprivation, that actually increases or post TBI, or somebody that's going through rehab or surgery, going through return to play, the recommendation actually increases quite a bit to anywhere between 10 to 20 grams a day. And then you look at, a sport like football, which is heavily dependent on the anaerobic system in terms of producing quick energy. So, in the average time of a play is around 5 to 6 seconds. And you multiply that by 70 plays over the course of an entire game. Your contribution to energy is generally about 50% of creatine phosphate and then 50% of anaerobic glycolysis. And then you have the aerobic system in between plays, just churning and trying to create ATP to make sure that recovery happens. So you have these linemen and these massive individuals, because the average size of football players has continued to increase over the past 30, 40 years. And they are just utilizing so much energy. Their bodies are going through so much trauma that you could make a case. And I've actually talked to a good number of athletes, like very, very up to date, intelligent athletes, about, hey, that 5 gram dose probably isn't going to be enough for you, independent of even, talking about those subconcussive hits or TBI, where generally for specific practices or after a game, it's like maybe we should look at 10 grams, 15 grams, 20 grams just to help facilitate recovery.
Hey, everybody, a quick break in the action here. Hope you're enjoying the show and we appreciate you listening.
we're working hard to bring you the highest quality content and best guests every single week. So if you could do us a big favor and go and like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, it would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to listen at the end of the show also to find out more information about our courses, as well as a special discount code for all our listeners. Thanks again, and let's get back to the show.
Right, so now you're getting to the next question, which is how you kind of shade your nutrition recommendations based on someone's training and their activity level. So, as my training or activity level or physical stress goes up, what mechanisms kind of kick into gear in your mind as far as your kind of checklist and your nutrition programming to say, okay, well, now I need to start utilizing these levers and pushing these buttons. What are some of those things that get triggered by increased activity?
Yeah, so I like looking at it from a stress perspective, and if it's an athlete, we would look at it from what time of year is it? Is it generally competitive phases or non-competitive phases? That's just a very general simplification. What is it that they're doing from a physical standpoint? So where's the physical stress coming from? But what else are they experiencing? Is it how much mental stress is on them? How much time are they spending, in meetings, trying to learn the playbook, new installs? How much like emotional stress are they going through? Environmental stress, from outdoor temperatures, environment to where they're living, is it a positive environment? And then more so like a spiritual type stress, like, okay, where are they out on the depth chart? Do they feel like, they're valued by the team? But ultimately the physical is going to drive what those calorie recommendations are, what we do with the macros, what kind of supplementation is going to support them. So looking at it from, like a Monday to Sunday, when are they training? What does that anticipated workload look like? Can we assign a designation? Is it, high, medium, or low? More often than not, the protein and the fat recommendations are going to be pretty straightforward. They're going to have the tightest regulation in what those recommendations are. So protein can be anywhere from 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. As training load goes up, we know that they're going to expend a lot more energy. So they're going to need more carbohydrate. But we don't want to keep every macronutrient the exact same, because if they're not looking to gain extra weight, then we're just going to have, if one goes up, then we'll cut back a little bit here and there on protein and fat, as opposed to an off day or just like a high intensity, low volume day. They're not going to be expending as much energy. So we want to just meet their demands with what those recommendations are. So over the course of an entire week, so say a team is practicing, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is tapered down, Saturday is tapered down, Sunday is game day. So I would tag Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday as high days, knowing that we want to answer in two things. Like, what did you just do that you have to recover from? What do you have to do that you have upcoming that you have to prepare for? So keep the carbohydrate intake higher on those high tag days, manipulate it a little bit on those lower days, but knowing that if they are going through pads, we know that through recent research, metabolic rate can increase, anywhere between 10-15% or greater in terms of what those trauma hits, the subconcussive hits, do to the body. So it increases the need for additional carbohydrate, because they measured RER for up to 3 days after that. So metabolism can increase for 3 days after a very rigorous practice, especially if you're layering day after day after day. Prepping for a game, we also want to make sure you're maximizing muscle glycogen stores. So it doesn't mean like, oh, the 2 days before a game, even though the volume is low, we can just keep carbohydrates low too. Well, no, we just keep them at a moderate pace. So that's how I generally look at it when it's more competitive phases in season, just looking at exactly what it is that they're doing. And every player is going to have a different type of player load. So even individualizing that even more, like how many snaps did you get? What does the workload look like? And explaining it to the players. That's the main thing. Because for some reason, a lot of athletes, they don't recognize how much stress and trauma happens when they're training on the field versus what they do in the weight room. What they do in the weight room is easy. Like honestly, like that's not the difficult part at all. Like what they do on the field is the most unique thing, and 99.999% of people can't do that. Handle, 70 to 100 snaps day after day on the field, probably even more, honestly, depending on how aggressive your coach is. So making sure that they are recovering appropriately, eating at consistent periods, hydrating. If it's competitive phases, now we're not looking to chase adaptations. We want to keep the athlete as healthy as possible. So yeah, we can include more anti-inflammatory, antioxidant type foods, just because we want to keep them as healthy as possible and understand that when they are training at a very high level, there is additional inflammation, there is higher amount of oxidative stress. So matching those recommendations to that is very important.
Cool. So let's talk about the non-athlete who doesn't have the metrics like GPS data to know how much they moved today. And they also, if you've been doing this a while like we have, we've seen the swing where it went from, if you wanted to have an aesthetically pleasing physique, it went from the bodybuilding biased 6 meals a day that you needed to have to now it swung to intermittent fasting of 1 meal a day. Talk about, meal timing and an eating schedule for the non-athlete who wants to stay lean and maintain or add muscle and stay healthy.
Yeah. Ultimately, and a lot of people might not agree with this, ultimately it's the total number of calories you're eating. Now, regardless of what direction you go to get there, whether it's a specific type of diet, are you plant-based, are you carnivore, are you, intermittent fasting, are you time restrict feeding? It's ultimately going to be around calories. If you are like the average normal American and you want to lose weight, and mainly you want to lose body fat, you don't necessarily just want to lose a ton of weight and lose muscle mass. So if you understand, hey, what is the appropriate caloric range for me to eat, and now figure out how do I layer that into my day. Now, some people find it difficult to stick to an ad libitum feeding plan where it's like, hey, you don't have to intermittent fast if you just eat your total calories within this window, breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, or whatever it is. Some people are just like, hey, if I have more defined parameters, it's easier for me to stick to. And that's where the benefit of something like intermittent fasting comes in. It's not like fasting in and of itself is the greatest thing. It's the caloric deficit and the consistency of staying in that while, sleeping well, not being overly stressed, not killing yourself in the gym, having recovery days. That's what drives adaptation for people to get healthier, get stronger, lose body fat. Now, if you need parameters like, hey, I'm going to first meal's at 10, last meal's at 6, or first meal's at 12, last meal's at 8, and that helps you stick with it, then that's great. By all means, go ahead and follow that. But more of the research is coming out about circadian type eating because there is something that is becoming more and more prevalent, which is chrononutrition. So eating based upon your body's natural rhythms and patterns when you're awake, when you're going to sleep, trying not to push it too far out of that. So what some of these studies are showing is there's a massive benefit with skewing more of your calories and front loading it earlier in the day. I'm not saying like if you have to wake up at 6 a.m. and slam a ton of food. And it's okay. When are you waking up? When are you going to bed? Finding more of this earlier restricting pattern where you eat when the sun's up, you finish when the sun's down, and not like, 5 p.m. hits and the sun goes down. It's like, okay, within a proper dinner time frame. So finish your last large meal, 3 hours or so before bed, give it time to digest, and then get the majority of your calories, whether it's 2 meals, 3 meals, 4 meals. You don't have to do the 6 small meals per day. You don't have to just do one. But ultimately, that's going to be dictated by what your feeding opportunities are, and it's going to be very individual based on somebody's schedule. So I have certain clients, my NFL guys eat 5-6 times a day. They have to. If you're trying to eat 4,000 calories, like, yeah, you're gonna have small time points here and there, a little bit before training, so they're not going to smash a ton, a little bit after training, a meal before they go to bed, something high in protein, enough satisfying. And then I have some clients that are eating 3 times a day. I have some clients that are eating 4 times a day. But it's all how many total calories should they be eating? What is that macro breakdown? And then, okay, what is the quality of those foods based on the data I have, the objective and the subjective, and then fitting it within their schedule, because everybody's schedule is going to be very different. Not everybody's going to be able to, eat at 9, 3, and 6. It has to have a little bit of nuance within that there.
Okay, so now as we're getting down this kind of direction of, all right, I just want to get ripped. It's summertime coming up. You have a formula you've posted a couple times about what you would use with players when you needed to kind of dramatically recomposition them and like add some muscle and drop a bunch of body fat. Just without going into all the nitty-gritty and details, just kind of give a brief flyby on what some of those tenets are that you have in that program.
Yeah. If it's somebody that isn't just trying to recomp, but they're like, hey, I just need to drop body fat and I want to just look aesthetically pleasing and muscular. So we've got to get in a caloric deficit, anywhere between 20 to 30% below what your expenditure is. There's 2 ways to do it. You can just
Now, if I can interrupt you there, Pratik, I'm sorry, but how are you going about figuring out where that number is? Because a lot of people are going to guess, like, I don't like, a lot of people will come to me and say, I should be eating 1,800 calories. And I'm like, you're 215-pound guy. There's no way you should be eating 1,800 calories. Where did you get that number from? Oh, I did some calculator online. So where can someone get a relatively dependable number of what their rough idea of their calories should be?
Yeah, generally we're using estimation equations, whether it's Ketch-McArdle, Mifflin, St. Jeor, Harris-Benedict, and they've been refined over the past 100 years or so. So the unfortunate thing is there's not one equation that's going to be perfect for everybody, because you have a variety of different things that influences somebody's resting metabolic rate. Some of it is ethnic and genetic background. Some of it is like what is going on underneath the hood. Do you have insulin resistance? Do you have thyroid issues? That's going to taper things down. So the general estimation equation might actually be a little bit higher than what's applicable to you. Those that have more fat mass versus muscle mass, they're going to have a lower resting metabolic rate. So unfortunately, it's kind of playing around with some of these equations. So you use your age, you use your height, you use your weight. If you have body composition, then that's great, because it can be a little bit more intentional about calculating this is, and then you say, how many days a week am I active? Using that activity factor to multiply by what my resting metabolic rate is. So that gives you, this is your maintenance level. So if I'm working out 3 to 5 days a week, it's moderate activity, multiply your resting metabolic rate by 1.55. So the good thing about these estimation equations and the calculators are it's free and it takes 5 seconds. You don't have to do complex math to be able to figure this out. You input the information, and as long as it's using a valid equation, you can get a general idea about what your resting metabolic rate is. The truth of the matter is it's going to be, plus or minus 100 to 200 calories off. So we have to understand that. Multiply by your activity factor, and then you get your maintenance level. So from the maintenance level, you can calculate what that deficit is. The easiest way to do that is you subtract 500 calories and say, okay, if I eat 500 calories less per day than what I'm expending, then theoretically over the course of the entire week, I should lose hopefully a pound. And we would hope that that's coming mainly from fat. If you're resistance training, you're eating a good amount of protein, you're sleeping well, and you're not killing yourself, and you don't have a lot of just underlying, issues internally with what your health status is. Another way is you just take your maintenance calories and you're like, okay, well, let me just find a percent deficit. So maybe I want to be in a 20% deficit on average over the course of the entire week. Or maybe I want to be aggressive and I want to go up to about 30%. I wouldn't recommend going anything beyond that, just because it's then you're talking about really being super aggressive. And the more aggressive you are in a longer amount of time, the more your metabolism is going to be influenced, the more you're going to influence your hormone status. And that's ultimately not going to yield long-term success. So people always think cross-sectionally, but they don't also think about the rebound, which happens with a lot of people that are trying to be perfect in a short amount of time. If you don't want to go through that, there are some general easy things that you can do. So for maintenance, most people can take their body weight, multiply by 15, 16, or maybe even like 17 calories per pound. And that gives you a little bit of a range of what your maintenance level it looks like. If we're talking about fat loss, that's generally around 10 to 12 calories per pound. So you take your body weight, multiply by 10, take your body weight, multiply by 12, and you get a little bit of a range of what that looks like. So it's an imperfect system because we're using indirect methods. We're not hooking ourselves up to like a metabolic cart and doing gas exchange analysis for 30 minutes and getting a pretty accurate result of, hey, this is what my now calculated BMR, which is the same thing as RMR, but it actually gives you that indirect calorimetry. So most people don't want to spend, $100 and, an entire morning going to a place to do that, which is okay. That's the benefit of using these estimation equations.
But even with that, though, even that's not going to be a perfect system, right? Like on the output side, we have all these dynamics that you're talking about that are changing, that I could slam on my brakes to avoid a squirrel and my cortisol goes up and my metabolism changed, right? On the output side. And on the input side, like you think you're counting and measuring and all that stuff, but like what if a little bit of that, your shake got stuck on the side of the blender? And what if your tablespoon's not really a full tablespoon? And it's like there's going to be some margin within there anyway. So it's really across the span of days and weeks that you want to stay within these rough ranges. And correct, like there's no exact mechanism anyway, so don't get too wrapped up in that type of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing about trying to figure out what the perfect level is. I actually just went through this with one of my clients. he works out 3 or 4 days a week. Sometimes he's able to move, just a very busy job with what he has to do, travels quite a bit. So started, following a lifting plan, following eating recommendation to fit within his schedule. And over the course of the month, he was afraid, like, well, I'm eating so much more volume of food because he's eating more single ingredient food, whether it's processed or not. Oats are processed, frozen blueberries are processed, but that's not a bad thing. Um, so he's like, well, my weight stayed the same. So I'm like, okay, we found what your maintenance level is. So now we have a better idea. If you stick with it and you want to see changes on the scale, because we don't necessarily know right now what that is, because if he's getting good sleep and recovering, workouts are going well, he's eating a higher amount of protein. I'm like, well, there is going to be some strength and muscle gain over time. So we can influence the scale now by doing one of two things. We can either cut even more, which I never really like doing, or we can give him some potential increases in movement opportunities, as long as it doesn't, add a ton more time onto his week. So it's like, okay, I think this is what I can be more diligent with, increase my average step count per day over the course of the entire week. Make sure that the days that I don't work out, I can go walk the dog early in the morning for a nice long walk now that the weather's getting better. Just a really good start to his day to not only physically, but mentally get him dialed into what he needs to do. So that's what we're going to track over time. So again, there's a lot of nuance that goes behind it. But the more you can be in control of your nutrition, say, hey, I can cook my meals at home, or I can piece it together at home instead of having to grab it from outside. Because then if you're grabbing it from outside, the caloric intake that you have, the studies show, can be anywhere from 10 to 25% off. So it's a pretty significant amount. The more you eat out, the more you're going to influence and have less of an idea of, okay, am I doing, is what I'm doing actually right? Or am I just completely not in line with what my intake is versus what my expenditure should be?
Okay, so most famous four words when we talk about diet and exercise and so forth is it all starts Monday, right? Where it's like, all right, I'm gonna start this thing. I'm gonna, I'm getting ready for summer or the wedding or the season, whatever it may be. And the mental and psychological apprehension is okay, once this harness comes down over my shoulders and I'm strapped in this roller coaster, like I'm locked in and there's no turning back. But talk a little bit about where you have spaces for grace, and even like people talk about like cheat meals. Where does that kind of fit in, and how and why and when?
Yeah, I think from a psychological perspective, when people understand, like, you don't have to be perfect, it's not all or nothing when it comes to anything with our health. It's more about the consistency of identifying, like, what are the good behaviors and habits that I need to do on a daily basis and check these boxes. And then where is there a little bit of grace where I don't have to be perfect all the time? Because ultimately, if we wanted to be 100% perfect with our health, we would just lock ourselves in our house. We would cook every single one of our meals. We would never take travel trips. We'd go to bed at the same time. We'd never go out to eat at a restaurant or experience a social outing or anything like that. But that's not what reality is. And I think people need to recognize that if you're on point the majority of the time, like if you are following something that fits within your schedule. So I think the biggest thing that I try to get across to my clients is I'm going to give you recommendations that makes sense, that it has to fit your schedule, it has to fit your lifestyle. It can't ask you to do crazy things, because if it does that, you're not going to be able to sustain it for a very long time. So the sustainability piece is one of the most important things. But also let them know that every day is not going to be the same. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be times when you're going to be influenced by, a kid's outing. You go to a birthday party, and what's being served at every kid's birthday party, it's cake and pizza. And you don't want to be that parent say, oh, I can't eat. And then your kids ask them, like, well, why aren't you eating? It's like, okay, that's fine. We accounted for one or two times over the course of the entire week that you're going to make this decision to eat whatever it is that you're feeling, but then we're still going to fall in line with sticking to what those recommendations are. So psychologically, you don't have to beat yourself up about, oh, I ate cake, or oh, I had pizza. It's like, okay, we've included it within what those recommendations are. Because the truth is, there are a lot of really good tasty foods out there that, what, you don't want to abstain from. You never really want to not have a nice dessert or have a really great pasta dish or eat, a burger and fries. But we don't want to make that the go-to. So I'm always a big advocate of, identifying one or two times over the course of the entire week, just eat whatever you want in terms of that meal. Like, don't spend the entire day just going off the rails, because ultimately it doesn't positively affect somebody psychologically, but even more so physically. When somebody is eating really well, they're taking advantage of their meals, eating single ingredient type foods, they're minimizing eating a lot of the ultra processed and junk foods. They start feeling a lot better. Gut health starts becoming a little bit more prevalent. They're more regular. They have more energy, and the second they eat something from outside that they had previously indulged in, whether it's more so alcohol or fast food, they're like, "Hey, I feel like crap. Like, oh, that was awful, and I don't want to feel like that again. So I'm gonna hop back on and continue to do what was really working for me." So again, I think there's always room for grace, and it's just figuring out what works. And sometimes when you're in a deficit for a good amount of time, the body needs a little bit of a rebound. It needs a little bit of like a reversal back up to maintenance, because that can actually help support more and better weight loss over time too.
Yeah, a powerful stat that I remember hearing that always stuck out to me is we had Dr. John Berardi on, and he took some pretty interesting data that he took from thousands and thousands and thousands of people that had been through his precision nutrition program. And he looked at compliance and successful outcomes. And he said people who were even compliant 20% of the time still had successful outcomes as long as they kept coming back, as long as they kept showing up, even if you only followed it 20% of the time. Now, obviously, your results were better at 40% than 20 and 60 than 40. But the interesting thing happened once you got above about 80%, that your results didn't really change that much. And probably the stress, to your point earlier, the stress of not being able to be social, the stress of having to be the one odd parent sitting there who's, not having anything while everybody else is having, like, that was more detrimental than just having the piece of cake and get over it and move on. So that was something that always stood out in my mind. I always talk to clients about that, to say 100% is almost worse than being 80%. So if we can be 80%, the other 20%, you can have some grace. Like you said, that one or two meals, just don't even think about it and move on. It's not going to make a difference in the grand scheme of things. Now, I know we're getting up against it with time, and there's something you mentioned earlier that I want to circle back to. And you talked about a little bit about your heritage and your background, because you even put in your bio that one of your main aims is to improve the health, fitness, and wellness of Indians. Kind of talk about that, because I know you're passionate about it and where that fits into your current role, what you're doing.
Yeah, it's the unfortunate thing that I've seen and experienced and grown up with, even now this day and age with, my family members. We've always put an emphasis on a lot of success with career and academic growth, making sure that you get good grades, you go to a good school, you get a good job, you really support the family. That's very much ingrained in the Indian culture. We never really were pushed into learning about health and fitness. And I've been a sports nut since I was a kid. I played a few different sports growing up, very mediocrely. I was never going to be a great athlete, but loved being involved in it. So it's always something that's resonated with me compared to a lot of my family members that might enjoy sports, but just haven't put health as a priority, because that hasn't been a big part of our culture. So now what we're seeing is you have a pretty affluent group of a minority population that does really well for themselves, but from a health perspective, we are now experiencing significant predispositions for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, now even cancer at younger ages, because we put so much emphasis on work and school and family at the expense of taking care of ourselves, not knowing that if we actually take care of ourselves from a physical standpoint, we actually get a chance to level up in all the different areas of life, because it allows us to handle even more stress and be better present for our jobs or for our family. So there's a lot of misconceptions, but there's also just not the emphasis. So for me, it's understanding what is it that the Indian population or the South Asian population needs to recognize in terms of improving their health. Like, what are the struggles people are facing? Why are they facing it this way? What do they know? What do they not know? What kind of resources are going to help support them? And the ultimate goal is to just make sure that, people of my generation are growing up and continuing to progress in their families and their careers without, succumbing to heart disease or a heart attack, or having to be on, insulin in their 30s and 40s, or succumbing to cancer, in your 40s, because a lot of this has really resonated even at a younger age. And a lot of my older family members, my dad's and mom's brothers and sisters, are now retired. They worked really hard, at doctors and pharmacists and all that. But because they didn't address their health, they are now dealing with some of these health issues in the latter part of their years. So selfishly, because I do have a son, he's an Indian son, I want my family members around as long as possible, but realistically, I know that's not going to happen. I don't have 20 or 30 more years with everybody, but I would like for them to get a chance to meet my son and be around them as long as possible. But there's only so much that can be done for the older generation. Now it's addressing more so the people my age and my generation to be like, look, you should want to be around for your children. You don't want to start having health issues in your 40s and 50s when your kids are teenagers or just starting out college, and then they have to worry about, oh, mom and dad are sick. So that's something that really means a lot to me, and it really has resonated when my son was born and my family rallied around both sides, him being born. And I'm like, unfortunately, a lot of my family members aren't going to have a lot of time with him because of these reasons. And I want to be somebody who can advocate for improving the health, wellness, and fitness of Indian people by showing them, like, look, I've done it. I have the same genetics as you. I'm not anybody special. It's just I made it a priority and fit it within my lifestyle while, working significant hours coming from the NFL, working 12 to 16 hours a day. I was able to take advantage of my health without doing anything crazy. It's just making it a priority and finding the easiest way to be able to do that. How to eat, how to exercise, how to take care of yourself, why you should want to put more of an emphasis on sleep, how to, identify where stress is coming from, what kind of stress self-care techniques you can employ, because these are all things that everybody's being exposed and experiencing.
Well, I applaud you not only for your own self-awareness, but the bringing that awareness culturally at a larger scale. And I think one of the things, and we could open a whole another can of worms with this, is that when we look at any specific culture in their health status, we often like to cherry pick stuff out of that. And we had this discussion with Brandon Marcello was on our show. We kind of talk about how like we both have Mediterranean descent, and talk about Italians and say, okay, well, they drink red wine, so let's take the resveratrol that's in the wine and take that in a capsule, and maybe I'll be as healthy as Italians. You're not understanding the community of how they all eat together, of how they go about their days and take a nap in the middle of the day, the importance of family, how they relate, their, like you talked about, their life expectations, all their social things, all their how much movement they incorporate throughout the day. There's a whole big picture there that we can't just cherry pick certain things and certain elements out of that, to take that broader lens and to be able to appreciate, okay, there's an issue with this culture that I'd like to be able to help, but I can't just cherry pick one thing and say, hey, all my Indian friends, you need to take this supplement, or all my, Italian friends, you need to eat this magic food. That there's a lot more to it, and understanding kind of what got us to this point.
No, it's so true. It's, the unique thing about our background is, you have the majority of my family members are vegetarian, but I'm a meat eater, my dad's a meat eater, my sister's a meat eater, some of my cousins are, but not all of them. So it's not like, oh, I'm telling them to eat. It's like, look, there's nuance behind it. It's everybody, I have to understand everybody's unique situation. And probably one thing to start with is, instead of telling you to eat meat, it's like, okay, do you eat eggs? Do you eat yogurt? Are you open to whey protein? So a lot of these things I've been able to get from my family members and then give them those recommendations. It's like, okay, do you have time to work out? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Do you have access to a gym? Do you have something at home? Do you want to do something at home, or do you want to go join a gym? What does your job look like? What does your day look like? Are you sitting down in front of a computer, or are you on the go all the time? How much movement are you getting? So as you said, it's understanding everybody's unique situation, but also recognizing what are some of the main things that everybody's really struggling with that they potentially could get a benefit if they address it.
Well, this hour really flew by, and I really appreciate your time, but I don't want to let you go without you talking about some of the projects you're working on, because you're involved in some pretty cool stuff. So kind of talk about what you're engaged with, a little bit about your personal coaching, as well as some of the other things that you're consulting with.
Yeah, just for my personal coaching. So I do one-on-one coaching. Right now, the majority of my clientele, uh, athletes, very high level, high focus, professional, South Asian Indian men, along with others, not specifically just to that, but the majority of my clients do happen to be Indian men, because there is that familiarity with, I understand what the family dynamic is, I understand the background, and I can speak specifically to what they could potentially do to help support their health and goals. So, I generally work with about 10 to 12 people one-on-one, and that's about it. Ultimately, my goal for this year is to open up more group coaching. So to take the unique process that I take somebody one-on-one, but be able to apply it more to a group setting. So it's more accessible to more people at more of an affordable rate. So they get a chance to do the full assessment, get individualized workouts, get nutrition recommendations, get access to the resources that I'm connected with, get access to testing, and then understand how they can be empowered to learn about their own health status and be able to do something about it. With consulting, one of the groups that I recently connected with is a startup. It's called Guide. And what we want to do is be able to provide unique type of care to the masses, using AI-based driven recommendations. So we're at the initial stages of it. And this is one of the big things about being able to support a much broader group of people instead of being defined, oh, I can only work with, X amount of people one-on-one, which is great. But over time, it's only going to be able to serve a very small subset of the larger population, the larger community. So I'll start posting a little bit more about that. We're obviously just gaining some traction, doing some beta testing. And I think it's going to be really, it's exciting and it's really cool. But outside of that, again, just being able to continue to post experiences, unique experiences, post digestible information. That's not the same stuff that gets regurgitated all over social media. Unfortunately, that's just what's popular now these days. So, take the insights that I got from high level in the NFL, the things that we were doing that made us, successful with helping decrease games lost to the injury, even though wins and losses, we were awful. I can't really do a whole lot about that. And then being able to show like people, the masses, like this is what you can do to assess and identify your health status and not have to do these crazy biohacks or take these really strange ingredients or supplements. You don't have to live an esoteric lifestyle to really be healthy and happy and confident.
Awesome. Well, it's great stuff, and you do great work. And I'm gonna definitely put all the links up there because I want everybody to start following you because it's very good information. And this was well worth the wait. And I can't thank you enough for your time. Thanks again, Pratik.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for listening. And this has been the Principles of Performance podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Principles of Performance podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, please like and share on your social media outlets, as well as subscribe and give us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your preferred platform is to listen to. For more information on the Principles of Program Design courses and workshops, visit us at www.principlesofprogramdesign.com and follow us on all of the social media channels where we post new content every day. To save 10% on any PPD courses, enter the discount code PRINCIPLESPODCAST10 at checkout. If you have any questions we can answer or suggestions for the show, you can email us at info@principlesofprogramdesign.com or message us on social media. Thank you again for your support.